when my daughter-in-law Rachel looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Claire, from now on, could you please use the back entrance? The neighbors keep asking questions about the older lady who visits." Something inside me finally snapped. 35 years I'd spent building that house brick by brick with my late husband. 15 more I'd spent letting my son James and his wife live there rent-free. And now? I was being asked to sneak in through the mudroom like some unwanted stray. I smiled, politely, nodded, and left without a word. But that night I called a locksmith. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Claire Wheeler, and at 62, I never imagined I'd be starting over. For most of my adult life, I poured everything into raising my son James. Every extra dollar went into his education, every free weekend into his activities, every tear and triumph meticulously documented. I was there for every high school football game, every academic award, even the 3-day science trip where I chaperoned despite having pneumonia. My husband Michael and I both agreed. Nothing was too good for our boy. Michael passed when James was in college. Pancreatic cancer. It happened so quickly that some mornings I still wake up reaching for him. After the funeral, I threw myself into making sure James finished his degree. I took on a second job at the hospital administration office on top of my nursing shifts. My hands would cramp so badly from the extra hours of typing that I'd have to soak them in warm water each night, just to straighten my fingers. "Mom, you don't have to do this," James would say during our weekly calls. "I can take out more loans." But I wouldn't hear of it. "Your father would have wanted you to graduate debt-free," I'd insist. And it was true. Michael and I had carefully saved for James's education, but the medical bills ate through our savings faster than I could have imagined. So I worked, and worked, and worked. When James met Rachel during his final year of college, I was thrilled. She was pre-law, brilliant and ambitious, with a confident smile that lit up her whole face. I remember thinking she reminded me of myself at that age, determined, clear-eyed, unstoppable. At their graduation dinner, she hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you for raising such an amazing man." My heart swelled with pride. All those years of sacrifice, all those double shifts and missed vacations, they felt worth it in that moment. 2 years later, they married. I spent my entire retirement account on their wedding, though I never told James this. When he marveled at the beautiful venue, I simply smiled and said I'd been saving for a special occasion. What I didn't mention was that the special occasion had originally been my dream of traveling through Europe after retirement, a plan Michael and I had mapped out on cocktail napkins during our 20th anniversary dinner. After the wedding, James and Rachel struggled to find affordable housing in the city where they both landed entry-level positions. The apartment they could afford was tiny, with mysterious stains on the carpet and neighbors who screamed at each other late into the night. "It's not ideal," James admitted during one of our Sunday calls, "but it's what we can manage right now." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the house. My house, the one Michael and I had built together. 4 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a kitchen with the island Michael had crafted by hand. I'd been rattling around in it alone for years, cleaning rooms nobody used, maintaining a space that felt emptier by the day. The next morning, I called James. "I've been thinking," I said carefully. "What if you and Rachel moved into the family home? I could take this small apartment downtown, closer to the hospital. It would be easier for my commute anyway." There was a pause on the line. "Mom, that's your house. Dad built it for you." "It was built for our family," I corrected him. "And you and Rachel are my family." After some convincing, James agreed. I drew up a simple agreement. They could live in the house rent-free, so long as they covered utilities and maintenance. The deed would remain in my name until I was ready to make more permanent arrangements. The day they moved in, Rachel cried as she ran her fingers along the kitchen countertops. "I can't believe this is our home now," she whispered. "Thank you, Claire. This changes everything for us." And it did change everything, just not in the way I'd imagined. At first, they invited me over weekly for Sunday dinners. Rachel would cook elaborate meals, and we'd sit around the dining table sharing stories and laughter. James would show me the improvements they were making: a new coat of paint in the guest bathroom, garden beds along the back fence, solar lights along the walkway. I felt a warm glow knowing my sacrifice was giving them a foundation to build their lives upon. But as Rachel's career in law began to take off, the Sunday dinners grew less frequent. "We're just so busy these days," James would explain when I called to confirm plans. "Maybe next week?" Next week turned into next month. The monthly visits became quarterly catch-ups. I tried not to mind. They were young, building their careers, finding their footing as a couple. It was natural they'd need space. Still, the silence of my small apartment felt heavier with each passing holiday spent alone. 3 years after they moved in, my hospital announced layoffs. Budget cuts, they said. Despite my seniority, I found myself walking out the door with a cardboard box and a severance package that wouldn't stretch nearly far enough. When I called James to share the news, his response was unexpectedly cold. "Have you started looking for another position?" he asked, skipping right past sympathy to practical concerns. "I'm 60, I reminded him gently. "It's not so easy to start over at my age." "Well, you're too young to retire, Mom. And honestly, we can't really help financially right now. Rachel's up for partner, and we're renovating the master bathroom." The master bathroom. The one Michael had designed specially for me, with the clawfoot tub he'd restored himself. I swallowed hard. "I understand. I'm sure something will turn up." But nothing did turn up. At least nothing full-time. I cobbled together part-time work at a local clinic and picked up evening shifts at the pharmacy. My knees ached constantly from standing, and some nights I'd collapse into bed without even changing out of my uniform. But I managed to keep paying my rent, kept the lights on, kept food in the refrigerator. Barely. When 6 months had passed without an invitation to the house, I finally called James. "I thought I might stop by this weekend," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "I haven't seen the renovations you mentioned." There was an awkward pause. "Let me check with Rachel," he said finally. "She's been really stressed about work lately. The house is kind of a mess." The house that I used to keep immaculate, I thought, but didn't say. He called back an hour later. "Sunday afternoon would work, around 4? But Rachel says not to expect dinner. They're having important clients over that evening." "Of course," I said, ignoring the pang in my chest. "I won't stay long." When Sunday arrived, I dressed carefully in my least-worn blouse, applied makeup for the first time in weeks, and even splurged on a small houseplant as a gift. I hadn't seen my son's home, my home, in over half a year. The anticipation made my hands tremble slightly as I parked on the street. As I walked up the familiar path to the front door, I noticed changes immediately. The porch swing where Michael and I used to watch thunderstorms was gone, replaced by modern-looking chairs I didn't recognize. The door had been painted a glossy black, and new house numbers in a sleek font had replaced the hand-carved wooden ones Michael had made. I rang the doorbell. A new sound, electronic and impersonal, and waited, and waited. Finally, I knocked. When the door swung open, I was face to face not with James or Rachel, but with a woman I'd never seen before. "Can I help you?" she asked, a glass of wine in her hand. "I'm here to see James and Rachel," I explained, confusion creeping into my voice. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I'm Claire, James's mother." The woman's expression changed to one of recognition. "Oh, they're out back. "Come in, I'm Vanessa, Rachel's colleague." I followed her through my former home, stunned into silence by the changes. Walls had been removed to create an open-concept floor plan. The warm, honey-colored hardwood floors Michael had installed had been painted white. Nothing looked familiar. Not the furniture, not the artwork, not even the layout. It was as if my life with Michael had been erased, painted over, demolished. Through the new wall-to-wall rear windows, I could see a gathering on the back deck at least 15 people, all dressed in business casual attire, mingling with drinks in hand. This wasn't a family visit. It was a work party. Rachel spotted me first. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly as she made her way over. "Claire, you're early. We said 4, right?" I checked my watch. "It's 4:05. "Oh, well, we got started. With some work colleagues. Quarterly team building." She lowered her voice. "It's important for my partner track." James appeared at her side, looking uncomfortable. "Mom, hey, didn't realize you'd be here exactly at 4. "I can come back another time," I offered, clutching the small plant like a shield. No, Rachel said quickly, though her eyes suggested otherwise. "Just, maybe you could use the back door next time? The neighbors keep asking questions about the older lady who visits, and honestly, it's a little awkward explaining that my mother-in-law doesn't live here when the house still has your name on the deed." My mouth opened, but no words came out. The older lady, back door, awkward. Each word landed like a slap. James at least had the decency to look embarrassed. "Rachel, come on. That's not—" "It's fine," I interrupted, suddenly desperate to be anywhere else. "I should go. You have guests." "You don't have to leave right away," James said, but his relief was palpable when I insisted. As Rachel walked me toward the front door, she paused in the foyer. "Oh, before I forget, we've been meaning to talk to you about the house situation. James and I would like to discuss purchasing it from you. We've done so many renovations, and it would be good to have everything properly sorted, legally speaking." I nodded numbly. "We can discuss it another time." "Great. I'll have our attorney draft something." She leaned in for a quick, perfunctory hug. "Thanks for understanding about using the back entrance in the future. It's just more appropriate." As I walked to my car, I felt something crack inside me. Not my heart, exactly, but something deeper, more fundamental. The realization that in my son's life, in my own home, I had become the person who needed to use the service entrance. Invisible, inconvenient, inappropriate. That night, in my small apartment with the leaking faucet and the neighbor's television blaring through the wall, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a locksmith. The second was to my late husband's oldest friend, Robert, who had practiced real estate law for 40 years. "I need to know exactly what rights I have to a property that's still in my name," I explained. "Even if I've allowed others to live there rent-free." Robert's voice was gentle. "Claire, what's going on?" I took a deep breath and told him everything. About the sacrifices, the broken promises, the backdoor comment. When I finished, the line was quiet for so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Finally, Robert spoke. "Claire, you need to listen carefully. What you've allowed is a permissive use arrangement. You own that house. Every brick, every nail, every speck of paint. They have resided there at your pleasure, without a formal lease, without any legal claim whatsoever." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you have options, more than you think." There was a pause, and when he continued, I could hear the smile in his voice. "And knowing Michael the way I did, I think he'd want you to exercise them." 2 days. Later, I stood on the sidewalk watching as the locksmith finished changing every lock on the house Michael had built for me. The house I'd given to my son out of love. The house where, apparently, I was now expected to enter through the back door like the help. As the locksmith handed me the new keys, I felt lighter than I had in years. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Another text from James, the fifth since I hadn't shown up for the appointment with Rachel's attorney. I ignored it. Instead, I walked up the front steps, inserted my new key into the glossy black door, and let myself in, right through the front entrance, exactly as I belonged. I paused in the entryway, letting the door click shut behind me. The house smelled different. Expensive candles and unfamiliar furniture polish had replaced the scent of Michael's woodworking and my herb garden. Standing there, I felt like both, an intruder and the rightful owner all at once. I moved through the rooms slowly, cataloging every change. The dining room table where Michael had proposed to me on bended knee, gone, replaced by a glass and chrome monstrosity. The built-in bookshelves he'd crafted for my nursing textbooks, painted over in stark white, now displaying decorative objects instead of books. Even the kitchen island where I'd taught James to roll out cookie dough had been replaced with something sleek and cold to the touch. They'd erased us from this space. Erased me. Made the warmth and history of our family home into something that could be featured in a design magazine. Beautiful, but soulless. I climbed the stairs, wondering if they'd left anything intact. The master bedroom had been completely overhauled, now sporting a platform bed and abstract artwork where family photos once hung. The bathroom renovation James had mentioned was clearly expensive. Heated floors, a rainfall shower, a soaking tub half the size of the clawfoot one Michael had restored for me. Only when I reached the smallest bedroom at the end of the hall did I find something untouched. This had been Michael's home office, with the desk he'd built himself and the view of the backyard oak tree he'd loved. The door was closed, and when I turned the handle, I discovered it was locked. Using my new master key, I let myself in and nearly gasped. They'd turned it into storage. Boxes were stacked to the ceiling, plastic bins lined the walls. And there, pushed into a corner, was Michael's desk, scratched and dusty, piled high with Christmas decorations still in their Target bags. I approached it slowly, running my fingers along the edge where his hands had smoothed the wood countless times. Something caught my eye. A cardboard box labeled Claire's Things in James's handwriting. Inside were photo albums, Michael's watches, the cross-stitch my mother had made for our wedding. All the pieces of my life, packed away like unwanted donations. Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I felt something hardening inside me, resolve taking shape where grief had lived for too long. I wasn't just going to reclaim my house. I was going to reclaim my dignity. I spent the next hour taking inventory of everything that was mine, making notes in my phone. The grandfather clock from my parents, the quilt my grandmother had made, the silver from Michael's family. These weren't just possessions, they were anchors to my history, physical reminders of the love that had built this home. When my phone rang, I wasn't surprised to see James's name on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. 10 minutes later, it rang again. And again. After the fifth call, I finally answered. "Mom, where are you? We were supposed to meet with Rachel's attorney today." "I had another appointment," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected, "with my locksmith." "Your what? What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I've changed the locks on my house, James. The house. That's still legally mine." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear his breathing change. When he spoke again, his voice had that placating tone one might use with an unreasonable child. "Mom, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Why don't we talk about this face-to-face? Rachel and I can come to your apartment." "I'm not at my apartment," I interrupted. "I'm sitting at your father's desk, looking at a box labeled Claire's Things." "Funny, I don't recall giving you permission to pack away my life." Another pause. "You're in our house? How did you—" "It's my house, James. Always has been. I have the deed to prove it." He exhaled sharply. This isn't like you, Mom. You're acting, I don't know, vindictive or something. Is this about what Rachel said about the back door? She didn't mean anything by it. She was just stressed with the party and… This isn't about a door, James. This is about respect. Something I've given you unconditionally for 30 years and received very little of in return lately. That's not fair. We've been busy building our careers, our life together. We can't always drop everything. I'm not asking you to drop everything. I'm asking you to remember who made your life possible in the first place. I took a deep breath. I've made a decision. You and Rachel have 30 days to find a new place to live. What? His voice rose to a shout. You can't do that. Actually, I can. You have no lease, no rental agreement, no legal right to this property whatsoever. I've already confirmed this with a lawyer. This is insane. We've put thousands into renovations. We've built a life here. On my goodwill, which ran out. The moment your wife suggested I skulk around to the back of my own home. I kept my voice level. 30 days, James. I'll be by tomorrow to collect some of my personal items. Mom, please. I need to go now. I have a lot to do. I ended, the call before my resolve could waver. As I made my way back downstairs, my phone exploded with texts. First from James, then from Rachel, then from numbers I didn't recognize. Her parents, her sister, even the colleague I'd met briefly the day before. I silenced my phone and slipped it into my purse. At the front door, I hesitated. Was I being too harsh? Too impulsive? Then I remembered Rachel's voice. The older lady. Use the back door. Awkward. And my determination returned. I locked the door behind me with my new key, walked to my car with my head high, and drove away from the home I'd given away too freely and was now taking back. The next morning, my phone showed 17 missed calls and 32 text messages. I ignored them all as I prepared for my day. I dressed carefully in the gray pantsuit I'd worn to job interviews, applied light makeup, and styled my hair. Today wasn't about looking young or beautiful. It was about looking formidable. As I drove back to the house, I spotted James's car in the driveway. I'd expected this. Taking a deep breath, I parked on the street and walked to the front door, and used my key. James and Rachel were waiting in the living room, both dressed in work attire. Rachel's eyes were red-rimmed, while James paced nervously. They froze when they saw me. Mom, James started, his voice conciliatory. We need to talk about this rationally. I think evicting us with no warning after we've lived here for years is the definition of irrational, Rachel cut in, her lawyer's training evident in her clipped tone. I set my purse down on the coffee table, a new one I didn't recognize, and remained standing. I'd hardly call it no warning. You've been treating this house as your own, making changes without consultation, and treating me like an inconvenient guest rather than the legal owner. Those were all warnings you chose to ignore. We've improved this place, Rachel argued. Every change has increased the property value. The kitchen remodel alone… I don't recall asking for a kitchen remodel, I said mildly, or permission to tear down the walls my husband built, or to paint over the hardwood floors he installed himself. James stepped forward, hands outstretched. Placatingly. Mom, we acknowledge we should have consulted you more. But this is our home now. We've built our lives around it. Our careers are nearby. Our friends. It was my home first, I reminded him. The home I gave up so you could have a better start. And how did you repay that generosity? By suggesting I use the service entrance. I turned to Rachel. Like the help. Rachel flushed. That was a misunderstanding. I was stressed with clients there. It was a poor choice of words. No, it was an accurate reflection of how you see me. And that's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. but I'm entitled to decide who lives in my house. James tried again. Mom, please, we can work this out. Maybe a formal rental agreement? We'll pay market rate, draw up proper paperwork. I'm not interested in being your landlord, James. I'm moving back in. They exchanged alarmed glances. Rachel recovered first. You've already given up this house, she argued. You've established a separate residence. You can't just change your mind years later because your feelings are hurt. I smiled thinly. My lawyer disagrees, as does the property deed with my name on it, as does the county assessor who still sends the tax bills to my address. I gestured. Around us. All of this was a gift, a loan, really, extended out of maternal love. A gift you've taken for granted. Rachel's professional composure cracked. This is about money, isn't it? You've been laid off, you're struggling, and now you see our success and want a piece of it. Rachel, James warned, but she was too angry to stop. We know you've been working at that pharmacy, Claire. We know you're barely making ends meet. Is this some kind of shakedown? Because if you need financial help, there are better ways to ask for it than this. This stunt. The room fell silent. Even Rachel seemed shocked by her own words. I looked at my daughter-in-law, this woman I'd once admired for her ambition and drive, and for the first time, I saw her clearly. She wasn't evil or even particularly cruel. She was just someone who'd never had to sacrifice anything meaningful, who couldn't fathom a world where love didn't come with conditions and fine print. This isn't about money, I said quietly. This is about remembering who you are and where you came from. This is about the fact that when I needed support, just emotional support, not even financial, you both treated me as an afterthought, an inconvenience. I turned to James. Your father would be ashamed of the man you've become. The color drained from his face. That's not fair. Neither is life, apparently. I lost my husband, my career, and now, it seems, my son. The only thing I'm not willing to lose is my self-respect. I straightened my shoulders. I'll be back on Saturday with movers to collect my personal belongings from that locked room upstairs. After that, you have 27 more days to find. Alternative housing. Rachel stepped forward, lawyer mode fully engaged now. We'll fight this. We've established tenancy. We've made improvements to the property. Any judge will see... See what? I challenged. That you've been living rent-free in a home you don't own? That you've modified the property without written consent? That you've treated the legal owner disrespectfully? By all means, let's take this before a judge. James placed a restraining hand on Rachel's arm. We'll figure something out, he said, though whether he was addressing her or me wasn't clear. I sincerely hope you do, I replied, picking up my purse. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have personal items to document before the movers arrive. I climbed the stairs again, leaving them whispering heatedly in the living room. I spent the next hour photographing everything in the storage room that belonged to me, making a detailed inventory in my phone. When I came back downstairs, the house was quiet. A note on the kitchen counter informed me they'd gone to work, but this conversation isn't over. I let myself out the front door, locking it behind me with my new key. As I walked to my car, a neighbor watering her flowers called out to me. Claire, haven't seen you in ages. Everything all right? I smiled, genuine for the first time in days. Getting there, Elaine. Finally getting there. The next few days passed in a blur of preparations. I gave notice on my apartment, arranged for movers, and consulted again with Robert about my legal standing, which, he assured me repeatedly, was unassailable. Throughout it all, James called and texted relentlessly, his messages evolving from angry to pleading to bargaining. Mom, can we discuss a compromise? Maybe we could buy the house from you at market value? What if we signed a formal lease? We could pay you enough to cover a nicer apartment. Rachel's family knows a great elder law attorney who could help. Us figure out a solution that works for everyone. Elder law. As if I were some senile grandmother who needed protection from her own decisions. I didn't respond to any of his messages. There was nothing to discuss. For once in my life, I was putting myself first, and the sensation was both terrifying and exhilarating. Saturday arrived, and with it, the moving truck I'd hired. I pulled up to the house at precisely 9 o'clock, the time I'd specified in, my formal written notice to James and Rachel. To my surprise, both their cars were in the driveway. The movers waited in their truck while I approached the door. Before I could use my key, it swung open. Rachel stood there, impeccably dressed, in designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, her expression carefully neutral. "Claire," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "James is in the kitchen." I followed her inside, where James sat at the kitchen island, a legal pad covered in notes before him. He looked up when I entered, and I was struck by how tired he appeared. Shadows under his eyes, a day's stubble on his cheeks. "Mom," he began, then cleared his throat. "I've been doing some thinking, and some research." I remained silent, waiting. "You're right that legally, you have every right to reclaim the house. We've consulted with 3 different attorneys, and they all confirmed it." He pushed a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that my heart twisted. "But I'm hoping we can find a solution that doesn't involve lawsuits or evictions or destroying our family." "I'm listening," I said, though I kept my expression neutral. Rachel took a seat beside him, her lawyer's composure firmly in place. "We're prepared to make you an offer," she said, sliding a folder toward me. "The current market value of the house, plus 10%, in cash. We've already been approved for the mortgage." I didn't touch the folder. "I'm not interested in selling." "Mom, be reasonable," James pleaded. "This offer is more than fair. It would give you enough to buy a comparable house in a better neighborhood than your apartment, with plenty left over for retirement." "My decision isn't about money," I repeated. "It's about reclaiming what's mine." Rachel's professional veneer cracked slightly. "Is this really about the house, Claire? Or is it about punishing us because I said something thoughtless about the back door?" I looked at her for a long moment. "This is about much more than a door, Rachel. This is about the fact that I gave you both a gift, a tremendously valuable gift, and you treated it, and me, with contempt. You erased every trace of Michael from this house. You packed away my belongings like discarded clothing. You made it clear through 100 small choices that I was no longer welcome in the home I built." "That's not true," James protested. "We've always said you're welcome." "Really? When was the last time you invited me over for dinner? Or called just to check in? Or remembered my birthday?" I shook my head. "You took the house and discarded the person who gave it to you." A long silence followed. Finally, Rachel spoke, her voice softer than before. "We've been selfish," she admitted, "career-focused and, yes, thoughtless. But is taking back the house the only way to address that? Couldn't we start over? Establish better boundaries? More regular visits?" I considered her words. Was there a part of me that wanted reconciliation rather than retribution? Of course, but I also knew how easily promises made in desperation could evaporate once the crisis passed. "I appreciate the acknowledgement," I said carefully, "but my decision stands. I'm moving back into my home. You have—" I checked the calendar on my phone. 24 more days to find alternative housing. James pushed away from the island, his face flushing. "This is unbelievable. We're trying to make this right, and you're being completely inflexible. Perhaps now you understand how I felt when I discovered you'd gutted the kitchen your father and I designed together without so much as a phone call to discuss it." Rachel placed a restraining hand on James's arm. "Let's stay focused," she murmured, then turned back to me. What if we restored the house? Brought back some of the original elements, made space for your things? The damage is already done, I said, though the offer did give me pause. Michael's craftsmanship can't be brought back with a trip to an antique store. Then what do you want? James demanded, frustration evident in every line of his body. To punish us? To make us homeless? To destroy our marriage? What's your endgame here, Mom? His words hung in the air between us, sharp and accusatory. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words to explain the complexity of my feelings. I want to wake up in the home I built with your father, I said finally. I want to sit on the porch where we watched you learn to ride a bike. I want to bake in the kitchen where I taught you to make your grandmother's apple pie. I met his gaze steadily. And yes, I want you to understand that actions have consequences, that treating people who love you as disposable will eventually cost you something precious. The fight seemed to drain out of him. He slumped against the counter, suddenly looking very young despite his 35 years. So that's it? There's nothing we can say or do to change your mind? You still have 24 days, I reminded him. That's more notice than most landlords would give in this situation. Rachel's phone chimed with a text message. She glanced at it, then at James. The movers are here, she said quietly. James looked confused. What movers? Mom just got here with hers. Rachel's gaze dropped to the counter. I took the initiative. I found us a short-term furnished rental. Yesterday. Month-to-month lease, no deposit required because of my firm's connection with the property management company. She looked up at him, her expression a mixture of resignation and determination. We need to start packing, James. This isn't a negotiation anymore. He stared at her, betrayal written across his features. You're giving up? Just like that? I'm being realistic, she countered. Your mother is within her legal rights. Fighting. This will be expensive, protracted, and potentially very public. My firm wouldn't look kindly on a partner candidate engaged in an ugly eviction battle with her mother-in-law. James turned to me, a last desperate appeal in his eyes. Mom, please, this is our home. I felt a twinge of something, not quite. Regret, but perhaps sadness for what might have been. No, James, it was a gift you took for granted. There's a difference. The doorbell rang, signaling the arrival of my movers. Rachel went to answer it, leaving James and me alone in the kitchen. I never thought you could be this cold, he said quietly. And I never thought you could be this entitled, I replied. I guess we've both learned something about each other. He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. Dad would hate what you're doing right now. I met his gaze without flinching. Your father believed in consequences, James. He believed in respect and gratitude and honoring those who sacrificed for you. If he were here right now, he wouldn't be angry with me. He'd be heartbroken over the man his son has become. James had no answer for that. He pushed past me and out of the kitchen, taking the stairs 2 at a time, the sound of a slamming door echoing through the house moments later. The movers came in, introducing themselves politely. I led them upstairs, to the storage room, standing aside as they carefully began to box my belongings. From down the hall, I could hear Rachel on the phone, her voice professional and controlled as she organized their own move with military precision. As the morning wore on, more movers arrived, Rachel's team, and the house became a carefully choreographed ballet of people carrying boxes and furniture. I supervised the packing of my own items, making sure nothing was damaged or left behind. By early afternoon, Rachel's movers had already filled their truck with the first load. She approached me in the hallway, her expression carefully composed. We should be completely out within 3 days, she said, her voice neutral. I've arranged for a cleaning service to come through after the last of our things are removed. I nodded, surprised by the efficiency. That's helpful. Thank you. A flash of something, regret perhaps, crossed her face. For what it's worth, I am sorry about what I said, about the back door. It was thoughtless and cruel. Yes, it was, I agreed. She waited, perhaps hoping for more. Forgiveness, understanding, a last-minute reprieve. When none came, she straightened her shoulders. I'll leave the new keys on the kitchen counter when we're done, she said, turning to go. Rachel, I called. After her. She paused, looking back. Take good care of my son. A sad smile touched her lips. I always have, even when he makes it difficult. With that, she continued down the hall to coordinate the next phase of their move. By evening, my belongings had been retrieved from their exile in the storage room. The movers had gone, promising to return the next day to begin bringing in my furniture from the storage unit where it had sat since I moved to the apartment. I stood alone in the half-empty house, listening to the unfamiliar sounds. James and Rachel had gone to their rental for the night, leaving behind a strange hybrid of their life and mine. Designer furniture sat alongside boxes of my old photo albums. Their sleek appliances shared kitchen space with my grandmother's cookie jar, rescued from storage. I wandered into the living room and sank onto their expensive sofa, suddenly exhausted. Had I done the right thing? The morally correct thing? I wasn't sure. But I had done the necessary thing, necessary for my own sense of self-worth, for my own ability to look in the mirror and recognize the woman looking back at me. My phone buzzed with a text. I expected James or Rachel, but instead saw Robert's name on the screen. How did it go today? Are you holding up okay? I typed back, they're moving out. Should be gone in 3 days. His response came quickly. That's faster than expected. How do you feel? I stared at the question for a long moment. How did I feel? Vindicated, certainly. Relieved that there hadn't been more of a fight. But also hollow. Empty in a way I hadn't anticipated. I'm not sure yet, I replied honestly. Ask me again when I'm settled back in. Will do. Remember, you did nothing wrong here, Claire. You're reclaiming what's rightfully yours. I set the phone down without responding. Legally, he was correct. Morally, that felt murkier. The house creaked and settled around me, familiar sounds I hadn't heard in years. Outside, through the window Michael had built to perfectly frame the sunset. The sky blazed orange and pink. I watched the colors fade, alone in my house, my home, and wondered what tomorrow would bring. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. True to her word, Rachel orchestrated their move with impressive efficiency. Professional packers systematically emptied the house of their belongings, while James remained largely absent, returning only to collect specific items or sign paperwork. I kept to myself during their exodus, staying in the small guest room that had been least changed by their renovations. There was no point in confrontation now. The die had been cast, the decisions made. We moved around each other like ghosts, careful not to occupy the same space at the same time. On the 3rd day, as promised, they were done. I was upstairs when I heard the front door open and close for the last time. When I came down an hour later, the house was transformed again, not empty, as Rachel had arranged to leave behind the larger furniture pieces for now, but stripped of the personal touches that had made it their home. On the kitchen counter lay 2 sets of keys, a folder of house-related documents, and a handwritten note in James's familiar scrawl. The utilities are transferred back to your name. Termite inspection was clear last month. The 3rd key is for the wine fridge, the one Dad always wanted but you said was extravagant. I guess something good came from our time here after all. J. I picked up the note, running my thumb over his signature. In all the anger and hurt of recent days, I'd forgotten the little boy who used to sit at this very counter, feet swinging, watching me bake with such concentration, you'd think I was performing brain surgery instead of making bread. Had I been too harsh, too unyielding? The thought nagged at me as I moved through the house, reclaiming spaces that both were and weren't mine anymore. The structure was the same, but the soul of the place had been altered. Not erased exactly, but transformed into something I didn't fully recognize. That night, sleeping in what had once been my bedroom, I dreamed of Michael. He sat on the edge of the bed, looking exactly as he had the day before his diagnosis, his eyes crinkled at the corners with the smile I'd fallen in love with 4 decades earlier. "You've really stirred things up, haven't you?" he said, his voice so achingly familiar I could feel tears forming even in my dream. "They left me no choice," I told him. "There's always a choice, Claire Bear." He used the nickname he'd given me on our second date, when I'd told him my full name was Clarissa, but everyone called me Claire. "The question is whether you can live with the one you've made." I reached for his hand, but he was already fading, the dream dissolving around me. I woke with tears on my cheeks and his question echoing in my mind. Could I live with the choice I'd made? I wasn't sure. But as I lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around me, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't have lived with myself if I'd continued to let them treat me as something less than I was. The morning brought clarity, if not peace. I rose early, made coffee in the unfamiliar high-tech machine Rachel had installed, and carried it out to the front porch. The swing was gone, but I sat in one of the modern chairs, watching the neighborhood wake up around me. Mrs. Patterson from across the street waved as she collected her newspaper. The Robinson kids waited for their school bus at the corner, backpacks, nearly as big as they were. A jogger I didn't recognize nodded politely as he passed. This was still my community, even after years away. This was still my home, even with its changed face. And James was still my son, even if we were currently strangers to each other. My coffee had gone cold by the time I made my decision. I went inside, found my phone, and dialed his number before I could change my mind. It went straight to voicemail. "James, it's Mom. I know things are difficult between us right now, and I understand why you're angry. But I want you to know that my door, the front door, is always open to you. When you're ready to talk, really talk, I'll be here." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "I love you, son. That hasn't changed, even if everything else has." I ended the call, set down the phone, and turned to face my reclaimed home. And whatever came next. 3 weeks passed with no response from James. I settled back into the house gradually, relearning its rhythms, discovering which floorboards still creaked and which windows caught the morning light just so. My furniture, the pieces I'd kept in storage rather than cramming into my tiny apartment, looked both familiar and strange in rooms that had been redesigned without them in mind. I spent the first week just cleaning, not because the house was dirty, Rachel's cleaning service had been thorough, but because it felt like a ritual, a reconsecration of space. I washed windows that didn't need washing. I polished banisters that already gleamed. I scrubbed grout with a toothbrush, working out my complicated emotions through physical labor. The kitchen gave me the most trouble. It was unquestionably beautiful, with its waterfall quartz countertops and integrated appliances, but it felt like cooking in a stranger's home. Gone was the butcher block island where I'd taught James to knead dough. Gone was the magnetic knife strip Michael had installed at precisely my height. Gone were the copper pots we'd received as wedding gifts, which used to hang from a rack overhead. In their place was something that belonged in a design magazine, gorgeous but impersonal. I found myself fumbling for utensils, opening 3 drawers before finding the one that held spatulas, reaching for cabinet handles that had been replaced with hidden touch latches. By the end of the second week, I'd developed a tentative truce with the new space. I'd hung my own artwork on the stark white walls. I'd replaced their abstract sculptures with family photographs. I'd dug out the quilts my grandmother had made and draped them over the sleek, uncomfortable furniture. It wasn't the home I remembered, but it was becoming mine again in small, meaningful ways. My neighbors welcomed me back with varying degrees of curiosity. Elaine from next door brought over a lasagna and didn't even try to hide her interest in the drama. "So James and that wife of his just up and moved out?" she asked, settling onto my sofa without invitation. "Marital troubles?" "Nothing like that," I said evasively. "Just a change in living arrangements." She nodded sagely. "Well, it's good to have you back in the neighborhood. Never did understand why you let them have this beautiful house in the first place." I just smiled and offered her more iced tea. Tom and Beverly from across the street were more tactful, simply saying they were glad to see me again and offering help if I needed anything moved or repaired. The young couple who'd bought the Peterson place at the corner brought over homemade bread and introduced themselves, having never met me during my absence. Little by little, I reintegrated into the community I'd left behind. I joined the garden club I'd once been active in. I volunteered at the library's used book sale. I reconnected with old friends who'd fallen by the wayside during my years of exile. But the silence from James cut deeper than I cared to admit. I checked my phone a dozen times a day, hoping for a text, a voicemail, any sign that he was ready to talk. Nothing came. I considered calling him again, but decided against it. The ball was in his court now. I'd made my position clear, both in reclaiming the house and in extending an olive branch afterward. Pushing further might only deepen the rift between us. Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life. I reconnected with a former colleague who mentioned that the hospital administration was looking for part-time consultants with nursing backgrounds. The pay was decent, the hours flexible, and the work aligned with my experience. I submitted my resume and was called for an interview within days. "We were so sorry to lose you during the layoffs," the HR director said, shaking my hand warmly. "Your institutional knowledge would be invaluable to our current initiative." A week later, I was employed again, not full-time, but enough to supplement my modest retirement savings and keep my mind engaged. The familiar hospital corridors welcomed me back like old friends, and if my new office was smaller than my previous one, it still had a window and a door that closed. It was during my third week back at work that I finally heard from James. Not directly, he still wasn't answering my calls or responding to my texts, but through Rachel, who emailed me at my new work address. "Claire, I hope this finds you well," her message began, formal as a business letter. James asked me to coordinate the retrieval of some personal items we left behind, specifically his childhood memorabilia in the attic and some kitchen equipment that belongs to my family. Would Saturday at 10 a.m. be convenient for pickup? No mention of our last interaction. No acknowledgement of the emotional fallout. Just a business-like request, as if I were a storage facility rather than his mother. I responded with equal formality. "Saturday at 10 is fine. I'll ensure someone is home if I'm called into work." Her reply came almost immediately. "Thank you. James's cousin Daniel will be coming in his place, as James has a prior commitment." A prior commitment. Of course, he did. I closed the email without responding further, a strange hollowness expanding in my chest. He couldn't even face me to collect his baseball trophies and yearbooks. Saturday arrived, sunny and mild. I'd spent Friday evening pulling the requested items from the attic, boxing James's childhood keepsakes carefully, separating out what I knew belonged to Rachel's family. By 9:30, everything was neatly organized in the foyer, labeled and ready for transport. At precisely 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. I smoothed my hair, straightened my shoulders, and opened the door, only to find myself face to face not with Daniel, but with James himself. He looked thinner than I remembered, shadows beneath his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. He was dressed casually in jeans and a faded University of Michigan sweatshirt I'd given him years ago. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, his posture uncertain. "James," I breathed, unable to hide my surprise. I thought Daniel was coming. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. Changed my mind. Seemed cowardly to send my cousin to do my dirty work. An awkward silence stretched between us. Finally, I stepped back, gesturing him inside. I have everything ready for you. He entered hesitantly, glancing around at the changes I'd made. His father's recliner now occupying the space where their modernist lounge chair had been, family photos replacing abstract art, warm-toned throw pillows softening the stark furniture they'd left behind. You've been redecorating, he observed neutrally. Reclaiming, I corrected gently. Making it feel like home again. He nodded, moving toward the boxes in the foyer. This is everything? Everything you listed, yes. I took the liberty of including a few other items I thought you might want. Photographs, mainly, and some of your father's things I've been saving for you. His shoulders tensed slightly at the mention of Michael, but he didn't comment. Instead, he began loading boxes into his arms, making trips to his car parked in the driveway. I watched him work, the silence between us growing heavier with each passing minute. When the last box was loaded, he returned to the foyer, hands back in his pockets. Thank you for organizing everything. It was considerate. You're welcome. I hesitated, then asked, would you like some coffee or tea? I should go, he interrupted. Rachel's waiting in the car. I glanced out the window, noticing for the first time the passenger in his sedan. I see. Another silence fell, this one charged with all the things we weren't saying. Finally, James spoke, his voice carefully controlled. Mom, He broke off, started again. I'm still angry about how all this happened. I think you were unfair and vindictive, and I think you chose your pride over your relationship with your only son. I flinched at his bluntness but didn't interrupt. But, he continued, eyes dropping to the floor, I've also been thinking a lot about what you said, about taking you for granted, about erasing Dad from the house. He swallowed hard. You weren't wrong about that part. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was something. An acknowledgement, at least. Thank you for saying that, I said quietly. He nodded once, sharply, still not meeting my eyes. Rachel's pregnant, he said abruptly. 12 weeks. We found out the day before. Everything happened. The news hit me like a physical blow. A grandchild. I was going to be a grandmother. And if things had continued as they were, I might have been asked to enter through the back door to visit my own grandchild. That's wonderful news, I managed, genuinely meaning it, despite the complicated emotions swirling beneath the surface. Congratulations to you both. Yeah, well. He shrugged, uncomfortable. Just thought you should know. I wanted to ask 1,000 questions. Was Rachel feeling well? Did they know the gender yet? Had they thought about names? But the rigid set of his shoulders warned me not to push. Please tell Rachel I'm happy for you both, I said instead. He nodded again, already turning toward the door. I should go. Thanks again for this. He gestured vaguely at the car full of boxes. James, I said quickly before he could leave. My offer still stands. When you're ready to really talk, my door is open. The front door, I added with a small smile. Something flickered across his face. Not quite humor, but not quite anger either. I'll keep that in mind, he said. And then he was gone, walking down the path toward his car, toward his wife, toward the life they were building without me. I watched until they drove away, Rachel's profile visible for just a moment as they turned the corner. Then I closed the door and leaned against it, allowing myself, for the first time since this all began, to cry. A grandchild. A new life. A future that might not include me. The tears, once started, wouldn't stop. I sank to the floor of the foyer, my back against the door, and wept. For Michael, who would never know his grandchild. For James, who had somehow become a stranger to me. For the years I couldn't get back and the damage that might never be repaired. When the storm finally passed, I picked myself up, washed my face, and made a pot of tea in the too-perfect kitchen. Life would continue, with or without reconciliation. I would continue. That evening, I sat on the front porch with my tea, watching the sunset as I had thousands of times before in this very spot. The chairs might be different, the porch newly painted, but the sky performed its nightly miracle just the same, crimson bleeding to purple, stars emerging one by one. My phone chimed with a text message. I expected it to be from work, maybe a question about the report I'd submitted Friday. Instead, I saw James's name on the screen, a single line of text. "We're having a girl." I stared at those 4 words for a long time, my vision blurring with fresh tears. Not tears of sadness this time, but something more complex, a bittersweet mix of joy and hope and lingering grief. I typed back carefully, "She's going to be beautiful and brilliant, just like her parents." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, ultrasound picture attached. Rachel says hi. The image loaded, a grainy black and white blob that somehow, miraculously, contained multitudes. A tiny hand, the curve of a spine, the suggestion of a profile that might someday resemble James, or Rachel, or even Michael. "Perfect," I replied, my hands shaking slightly. "Absolutely perfect." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "We're thinking of naming her Michelle. After Dad." I pressed a hand to my mouth, overwhelmed. "He would be so honored," I wrote back. "So am I." "Yeah, well, family is family, right? Even when it's complicated." I read those words over and over, hearing in them the first tentative notes of reconciliation. Not forgiveness, not yet, and certainly not forgetting, but perhaps the beginning of something new, something that acknowledged the pain of the past while leaving room for a different future, always. I replied simply. The conversation ended there, neither of us quite ready to push further, but it was enough, a crack in the wall, a shaft of light through the darkness. I slept more soundly that night than I had in months. The following weeks brought gradual, careful reconnection. James didn't call, but he texted occasionally. Updates about the pregnancy, questions about family medical history, once even a photo of their new apartment with a bemused caption about the building's underpowered air conditioning. I responded warmly, but didn't push, understanding that he was setting the pace of our reconciliation. I shared small details of my own life, my return to work, the garden club's latest project, a minor plumbing emergency that turned out to be less serious than feared. It wasn't the relationship we'd had before, but it was something. A foundation we could build upon, one text message at a time. Rachel remained largely in the background of these exchanges, occasionally mentioned but never directly involved. I understood her reticence. From her perspective, I was the villain who had uprooted their comfortable life and forced them into a rental apartment just as they were preparing for parenthood. So I was surprised when, 6 weeks after their visit to collect belongings, my phone rang with her number on the display. "Claire?" Her voice sounded strained. "I'm sorry to call out of the blue like this, but I didn't know who else to ask." Alarm immediately flooded my system. "Is everything all right? Is it the baby?" "The baby's fine," she assured me quickly. "It's just... James is out of town at a conference, and I've been having these terrible headaches. The doctor wants me to come in for monitoring, but they said I shouldn't drive myself, and my parents are on a cruise and... I'll be right there," I interrupted, already reaching for my car keys. "Text me your address. 20 minutes, tops." "Thank you," she breathed, the relief in her voice palpable. I didn't want to worry James, and I didn't know who else to call. "You did exactly the right thing," I told her firmly. "I'm on my way." The address she sent was in a new apartment. Complex across town, modern, sterile, and clearly expensive. When I arrived, Rachel was waiting in the lobby, her face pale, one hand pressed against her temple. "Thank you for coming," she said formally, as if we were business acquaintances rather than family. "Of course." I resisted the urge to check her forehead for fever or ask a dozen anxious questions. "Let's get you to the doctor." The drive to the hospital was quiet, Rachel answering my few careful inquiries with minimal responses. Yes, the headaches had started yesterday. No, she wasn't having any other symptoms. Yes, she'd already informed her OB, who wanted her monitored as a precaution. It wasn't until we were sitting in the waiting room of the maternal fetal medicine department that she finally relaxed enough to really talk to me. "This wasn't how I imagined we'd next spend time together," she admitted, attempting a small smile. "Life rarely follows our careful plans," I replied, thinking of all the twists and turns my own path had taken. She nodded, wincing slightly as another wave of pain hit her. "I want you to know," she said after it passed, "that I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about how we treated you." I stayed silent, giving her space to continue. "I was raised to believe that success meant having the right job, the right house, the right connections. My parents, they didn't understand sacrifice the way you do." She looked down at her hands, twisted together in her lap. "When James told me what you'd done for him, working multiple jobs after your husband died, giving up your retirement, savings for his education, I couldn't really comprehend it. It seemed, I don't know, excessive, unnecessary." "Different families have different values," I said carefully. "Yes, but some values are objectively better than others." She met my eyes directly for the first time. "What you did for James came from love. What I did, asking you to use the back door, treating you like hired help rather than family, that came from insecurity and status anxiety." She shook her head. "I'm not proud of the person I was in that moment." Before I could respond, a nurse called her name. Rachel stood, swaying slightly. I instinctively reached out to steady her, and she didn't pull away. "Will you come in with me?" she asked, vulnerability clear in her voice. "I don't want to be alone." "Of course," I said, supporting her elbow as we followed the nurse. "That's what family is for." The examination took over an hour. Blood pressure readings, urine samples, blood draws, an ultrasound that showed baby. Michelle floating peacefully, oblivious to her mother's discomfort. Finally, the doctor, a kind-faced woman with silver-streaked hair, delivered her verdict. "Tension headaches, exacerbated by pregnancy hormones," she said, patting Rachel's hand reassuringly. "Not preeclampsia, which was my main concern. I'm prescribing rest, hydration, and acetaminophen as needed. If they don't improve in 48 hours, or if you develop any other symptoms, come back immediately." Relief washed over Rachel's face. "So the baby is okay?" "The baby is perfect," the doctor confirmed. "Just make sure you're taking care of yourself as well. Pregnancy is stressful enough without adding unnecessary anxiety." When we left the hospital, the sun was setting, painting the parking lot in shades of gold and pink. Rachel looked exhausted but considerably less pained. "I can fix you something to eat when we get you home," I offered as I helped her into the car. "Unless you'd prefer to pick up takeout?" She hesitated. "Actually, I was thinking, would it be okay if I came to your place instead? Just for a little while?" She rushed on before I could respond. "It's just, the apartment is so empty with James gone, and I've been curious about what you've done with the house and—" "Rachel," I interrupted gently, "you're always welcome in my home. The front door is always open to family." The tension visibly drained from her shoulders. "Thank you." The drive back to my house, our house, was quiet but companionable. When we arrived, Rachel paused on the front porch, taking in the new-old appearance I'd created. Hanging ferns in the spots where Michael had installed hooks decades ago. the porch railing freshly painted in the warm cream color we'd originally chosen together. "It looks nice," she said softly. "More like a home." I unlocked the front door and gestured her inside. That was the idea. She moved through the room slowly, taking in the changes I'd made and the original elements I'd restored or highlighted. The family photos on the mantel, the bookshelf once again filled with actual books, the throw pillows and quilts that softened the modern furniture. "It's warmer now," she observed, "more inviting." "I kept most of your furniture," I pointed out. "The pieces work well in the space, even if they weren't my first choice." She smiled faintly. "Diplomatic way of saying you hated our taste." "Not hated," I corrected. "Just, it wasn't mine. It didn't reflect my history or my preferences." I gestured toward the kitchen. "Why don't you sit while I fix us something to eat? Doctor's orders were rest, remember?" Rachel settled at the kitchen island while I assembled a simple meal from the contents of my refrigerator: tomato soup, grilled cheese sandwiches, sliced fruit on the side. Comfort food from my own childhood, unpretentious but nourishing. We ate in surprisingly comfortable silence. When she'd finished, Rachel pushed her plate away with a contented sigh. That was exactly what I needed. "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "This is what I imagined, you know. When James first told me his mom was a nurse, I pictured someone nurturing and practical, someone who would bring soup when you're sick, and know exactly which over-the-counter medication is safe during pregnancy." I raised an eyebrow. "As opposed to?" "As opposed to the woman I decided you were when I saw this house." She glanced around the kitchen. "I grew up in apartments. Small ones. When James brought me here for the first time, I couldn't believe his family had this beautiful house with a yard and a porch swing. It seemed, I don't know, unfair somehow. Like you'd had this perfect suburban existence while my parents struggled to make rent." "It wasn't perfect," I said quietly. "And it wasn't handed to us. Michael and I worked incredibly hard for this place. We sacrificed vacations and new cars and eating out. We did most of the renovations ourselves, learning as we went." She nodded. "I know that now, but at the time I just saw what I hadn't had, and I resented it, resented you." She traced a pattern on the countertop with her fingertip. "When you offered us the house, part of me saw it as reparations, almost. Like you owed us this beautiful life because we hadn't grown up with the advantages James had." This admission hung in the air between us, raw and honest. I considered my response carefully. "We all have different journeys," I said finally. "Different challenges, different privileges. The secret is recognizing both in ourselves and others." She looked up, her eyes suspiciously bright. "I've been so unfair to you, Claire." The backdoor comment was just the culmination of years of unwarranted resentment. "I'm truly sorry." "Thank you for saying that," I said, reaching across the island to briefly touch her hand. "It means a lot to hear." "I want Michelle to know." "Her grandmother," she continued, her hand instinctively moving to her growing belly. "To really know you, not some sanitized version of you that fits my narrative." "I'd like that very much," I said softly. Rachel stayed for another hour, the conversation growing easier as we moved from the difficult topics of the past to the more hopeful terrain of the future. She showed me more ultrasound pictures on her phone. We discussed nursery colors and crib safety and the relative merits of various parenting philosophies. When she finally yawned for the third time in 10 minutes, I insisted on driving her home. "I can call a rideshare," she protested. "You've done more than enough." "Nonsense. Your family and you're carrying my granddaughter. The least I can do is make sure you get home safely." She didn't argue further, which told me just how tired she really was. As I pulled up to her apartment building, she turned to me with an unexpected question. "Would you consider coming to my baby shower next month? My mother's planning it, but..." I'd really like you to be there. The invitation caught me by surprise. I'd be honored, I said sincerely. Good. She smiled, the first genuine, unreserved smile I'd seen from her in years. I'll text you the details. She opened the car door, then paused. And Claire? Thank you for everything today. Anytime, I replied, meaning it completely. I watched until she was safely inside the building before driving away, my heart lighter than it had been in months. One conversation hadn't erased all the hurt or healed all the wounds, but it had opened a front door, to the possibility of a new kind of relationship. The following Sunday, my phone rang just as I was finishing my morning coffee. James's name flashed on the screen. Mom? His voice sounded hesitant but determined. I was wondering if you'd be free for dinner tonight, at our place. I closed. My eyes briefly, a wave of gratitude washing over me. I'd love that, James. What time? 6? And Mom. He paused. Use the front door. It's where family belongs. I'll see you at 6, I promised, my voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overflow. After we hung up, I sat on my front porch for a long time, watching the Sunday morning unfold around me. Neighbors walking dogs, children riding, bikes, a world continuing its eternal cycle of growth and change, and sometimes, if you're very fortunate, reconciliation. The house behind me stood solid and unchanged in its fundamental structure, despite all the cosmetic alterations of recent years. Like family, I thought. The foundation remains even when the surface is transformed. I'd changed the locks to reclaim what was mine, yes. But in doing so, I'd also unlocked something far more valuable. The truth about what really matters, about what home truly means, and about the healing power of standing firmly in your own worth. The front door was open now, not just to my home, but to a future I couldn't yet fully imagine. One that included a granddaughter named Michelle, Sunday dinners with James and Rachel, and the continued unfolding of a family story that had weathered storms but remained at its core unbroken. That dinner at James and Rachel's apartment marked the beginning of our healing, not the end. Reconciliation, I've learned, isn't a single moment of forgiveness, but a long series of small steps forward, occasionally punctuated by steps backward. 6 months passed, bringing with them weekly dinners, doctor's appointments where I was invited to hear Michelle's heartbeat, and lengthy conversations, sometimes uncomfortable, always necessary, about expectations, boundaries, and the shape of our family moving forward. I still don't understand why you did it, James said during one such conversation. We were sitting on my front porch, watching fireflies emerge in the early summer twilight. Why you kicked us out instead of just talking to us about how you felt? I considered my response carefully. I tried talking. For years I tried. But you weren't listening. Not really. You heard the words but missed their meaning. I looked at him directly. Sometimes people need to lose something to understand its value. He frowned, still resistant to accepting full responsibility. It just seems extreme. We were building our lives, focused on our careers. Every family goes through periods where communication breaks down. It wasn't just poor communication, James. It was fundamental disrespect. I kept my voice gentle, despite the difficult truth. When Rachel asked me to use the back door, it wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a pattern where my needs, my feelings, even my existence had become inconvenient to you both. He winced, unable to deny it. We've been talking about that in our marriage counseling, he admitted. About how we got so caught up in our vision of success that we lost sight of what actually matters. This was news to me. You're in counseling? He nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. Rachel's idea, actually. She said she didn't want Michelle growing up with parents who measure love in square footage and neighborhood prestige. A small smile touched his lips. She's been doing a lot of reflecting since that day you took her to the hospital. I felt a surge of respect for my daughter-in-law. Perhaps I'd underestimated her capacity for growth, just as she'd underestimated my worth. I'm glad to hear that, I said sincerely. It takes courage to examine yourself that honestly. James was quiet for a moment, watching a neighbor walk by with a golden retriever. Do you think Dad would be disappointed in me? He asked finally, echoing the question that had hovered unspoken between us for months. I reached over and took his hand, the same hand I'd once guided as he learned to write his name, to tie his shoes, to drive a car. Your father would be proud of the man you're becoming right now, I said, the one who's brave enough to face his mistakes and work to correct them. His fingers tightened around mine briefly before letting go. I miss him, he said quietly, especially now with the baby coming. I keep thinking about all the things he won't get to teach her. Then we'll have to remember for him, I replied. We'll tell Michelle stories about her grandfather, how he built this house with his own hands, how he laughed with his whole body, how he believed that family was the most important work we ever do. That night, as James prepared to leave, he hugged me. Really hugged me, not the perfunctory embrace I'd grown accustomed to in recent years. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered, his voice thick, for everything. I held him tightly, feeling the years between us dissolve. I know, sweetheart, I am too. The day Michelle entered the world was the most perfect autumn morning. Crisp air, golden light, leaves just beginning to surrender their summer green for more vibrant hues. The call came at 5:17 a.m., James's voice simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. Mom, she's here. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Rachel's doing great. I was dressed and in my car within 10 minutes, heart racing with a joy I hadn't experienced since James's own birth. The hospital corridors seemed to stretch endlessly as I followed the signs to the maternity ward, finally arriving at the room, number James had texted. I knocked softly, then pushed the door open to find Rachel propped up in bed, hair damp with exertion, face glowing despite her obvious fatigue, and in her arms, a tiny bundle wrapped in a hospital blanket. Claire. She greeted me, her smile genuine and warm. Come meet your granddaughter. I approached the bed with reverent steps, peering down at the perfect, wrinkled face of Michelle Elizabeth Wheeler. She had James's chin, I thought, and perhaps the shape of Rachel's eyes, though it was too soon to tell for certain. She's beautiful, I whispered, unable to take my eyes off her. Absolutely perfect. Would you like to hold her? Rachel asked, already shifting to transfer the baby into my waiting arms. The weight of her, so slight yet somehow containing the entire universe, nearly brought me to my knees. I sank into the bedside chair, cradling Michelle against my heart, overwhelmed by love so fierce it bordered on painful. Hello, sweet girl, I murmured. I'm your Grandma Claire. I've been waiting so long to meet you. James appeared from the adjoining bathroom, his face unshaven, eyes red-rimmed from a night of anxious waiting. He perched on the edge of Rachel's bed, one hand resting protectively on her leg. Look at that, he said softly. 3 generations of Wheeler women. 4, really, I corrected. She has your grandmother's hands. Long fingers, just like you did as a newborn. As I gazed down at Michelle's sleeping face, I was struck by the circular nature of life, how ends become beginnings, how loss creates space for new love, how the story never truly concludes but transforms. In this tiny person, pieces of Michael lived on. Pieces of me, pieces of ancestors she would never meet but whose blood flowed in her veins. Thank you, I said, looking up at James and Rachel, for letting me be part of this. Rachel reached over, her hand finding mine where it supported Michelle's small body. "We wouldn't have it any other way," she said, her voice soft but certain. "Family belongs together." The months that followed brought new rhythms to our lives. I became a regular fixture at James and Rachel's apartment, helping with midnight feedings, offering advice when asked, and sometimes when not, marveling at every tiny milestone in Michelle's development. "We've been thinking," Rachel said one evening as I rocked Michelle to sleep, her tiny body warm and trusting against my chest. "This apartment isn't really working for us anymore." I looked up, surprised. "Oh? Are you considering buying something?" She exchanged a glance with James, some unspoken communication passing between them. "Actually," he said, taking over, "we were wondering how you'd feel about us moving back into the house." My hands stilled their gentle patting of Michelle's back. "Into my house?" "Not like before," Rachel clarified quickly. "We were thinking more of a cohabitation arrangement. The house is certainly big enough for all of us to have private space, plus common areas we could share." I blinked, trying to process the suggestion. "You want us all to live together? Under one roof?" James nodded, looking both hopeful and apprehensive. "It makes sense financially, and it would give Michelle daily time with you. Plus, we could help with maintenance, yard work, all the things that are getting harder as you get older." I bristled slightly at the implication that I needed assistance due to age, but I had to admit there was practical wisdom in the suggestion. The house was large, too large for one person, really. The 4-bedroom layout had always been intended for a family. Still, after everything we'd been through, the idea of surrendering my hard-won independence gave me pause. "We've really thought this through," Rachel added, seeming to sense my hesitation. "We'd pay you rent, actual market rate rent, not the token amount we discussed before. We'd sign a formal lease with clear terms. And most importantly, we'd respect that it's your house. No more renovations without discussion. No more treating you like a guest." "What about my bedroom?" I asked, the question sounding oddly childish, even to my own ears. "It would remain yours," James assured me. "We'd take the guest room and the office. The 4th bedroom could be the nursery." I glanced down at Michelle, now soundly asleep against my shoulder. There was undeniable appeal in the idea of watching her grow day by day, of being present for every new word and wobbly step. And yet, "I need time to think about this," I said finally. "It's a big decision." They both nodded, clearly having anticipated this response. "Of course," Rachel said. "Take all the time you need. There's no rush." But that wasn't entirely true. Their lease was ending in 2 months. Michelle was outgrowing the small nursery nook they'd carved out of their living room. The practical timeline for a decision was shorter than any of us wanted to admit. I spent the next week in careful contemplation, making lists of pros and cons, consulting with friends, even speaking with a family therapist who specialized in multi-generational households. I wandered through my house, Michael's house, our house, trying to imagine it transformed once again, this time into a space we would all share. Could I do it? Could I open my home again, knowing the potential for hurt, for boundary violations, for the slow erosion of my authority in my own space? The answer came to me not in a moment of rational analysis, but in a dream. Michael was there, sitting on our bed as he had in my earlier vision, his eyes crinkled with that familiar smile. "You're overthinking this, Claire Bear," he said, using the nickname only he had ever called me. "I'm being cautious," I protested. "They hurt me before. They disrespected our home, our history." "They made mistakes," he corrected gently. "Just like we did when we were young. Remember how my mother nearly disowned me when we painted her? Antique dining table, that awful avocado green?" I smiled despite myself. We'd been so proud of that weekend DIY project, not understanding the family heirloom's value until it was too late. That was different, I argued. We were trying to surprise her, not erase her. Intentions matter, Michael acknowledged. But so does forgiveness. So does second chances. He reached for my hand, and in the logic of dreams, I could feel his touch warm and solid. Our house was built for family, Claire, for noise and mess and arguments and reconciliation, for life being lived in all its complicated glory. I woke with tears on my face, but clarity in my heart. The next day, I invited James and Rachel to dinner, at my house, at our house, at what might soon be our shared home once again. They arrived precisely on time, Michelle dressed in a tiny cardigan I'd knitted myself. We ate in the dining room, using Michael's mother's china that I'd carefully unpacked from storage. The conversation flowed easily, touching on Rachel's recent promotion, James's new project at work, Michelle's emerging personality. When dessert was served, apple pie, Michael's favorite, I cleared my throat, drawing their attention. "I've been thinking about your suggestion," I began, noting how they both tensed slightly, preparing themselves for rejection. "About all of us living here together." "Mom, if you're not comfortable with it, we completely understand," James said quickly. "We shouldn't have—" I held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "I think it could work," I said, "with some clear agreements in place." The relief on their faces was immediate and palpable. Rachel reached for James's hand, squeezing it tightly. "We're listening," she said. "Whatever you need to make this comfortable for you." I outlined my conditions: separate spaces within the house, shared responsibilities for upkeep, regular family meetings to address any concerns before they festered, and most importantly, mutual respect for each other's autonomy and dignity. "And one more thing," I added, my voice softening as I looked at them both. "This arrangement isn't just about convenience or finances. It's about actively choosing to be a family, with all the work and compromise that entails. If we do this, we're committing to really seeing each other, really listening to each other. No back doors, literal or metaphorical." They nodded soberly, understanding the weight of what I was asking. "We want that too," James said, "to be a real family again." "Not again," I corrected gently. "Something new. Something better than before." 2 weeks later, they moved back in, not as entitled adult children claiming space that was rightfully mine, but as equal partners in creating a home where 3 generations could thrive together. The moving truck brought their furniture, which we integrated thoughtfully with mine. The sleek modern pieces sat alongside Michael's handcrafted ones, creating an eclectic harmony that somehow worked. That evening, after the movers had gone and Michelle was asleep in her new nursery, the 3 of us sat on the front porch, watching the neighborhood settle into dusk. James had repaired the porch swing, a peace offering of sorts, and Rachel and I sat side by side on it, gently swaying. "Welcome home," I said, raising my glass of iced tea and a toast. "To family," Rachel responded, her glass meeting mine with a gentle clink. "To front doors," James added with a smile, "always open to those we love." As the stars emerged overhead, I thought about the journey that had brought us here. The hurt and healing, the loss and recovery, the difficult truths and hard-won wisdom. Changing the locks had been an act of self-preservation, but opening the door again was an act of courage and hope. In the end, I hadn't just reclaimed my house. I'd reclaimed my place in my family, not as the auxiliary figure to be tolerated or accommodated, but as a vital, valued member with wisdom to offer and love to give. And in doing so, I'd helped create something precious for Michelle. A home where integrity and forgiveness lived side by side, where history was honored even as new chapters were written. The back door remained precisely what it should be, just another entrance to a house filled with light and love, no more or less significant than any other threshold we might cross together. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.